Sarah's journey away from the life she had always known wasn't sudden. It wasn't a dramatic eruption of emotion that forced her to leave, but rather a slow, suffocating decline that finally pushed her to her breaking point. Sitting in her foster family's living room, the world seemed quieter now, less sharp, less cutting. But that didn't mean her mind had settled. The memory still played on a loop. The coldness in her parents' eyes, the sneering laughter of her classmates, the humiliating appointment at the gynecologist's office. For years, Sarah had lived under the weight of her parents' expectations, their relentless need for control disguised as discipline or guidance. At first, she had tried to please them, to mold herself into the daughter they wanted. Polite, obedient, silent. But it was never enough. Her first taste of freedom, her first act of rebellion, had been enough to shatter the delicate illusion her parents had constructed around her life. And now, away from them, she felt something strange. Not freedom, not yet, but the tiniest flicker of it, like a candle in a pitch-black room. Melissa, her social worker, noticed the change almost immediately. "You're holding your head higher," she said during one of their weekly check-ins. "That's a good sign." Sarah gave a small smile. "It doesn't feel that way yet. I still hear their voices in my head. I still feel like I'm failing." Melissa's expression softened. "You're not failing, Sarah. You're healing. And healing takes time." But Sarah didn't believe her. Not fully. How could she, when the world still felt so heavy on her shoulders? Her parents' attempts to regain control weren't surprising, but they were painful. Sitting across from them in the courtroom, Sarah could feel the tension radiating from them. Her mother's lips were pressed into a thin line, her eyes burning with a mix of anger and something Sarah couldn't quite place. Guilt, maybe? Or was it fear? Her father, on the other hand, looked like he had been carved from stone. His jaw was tight, his shoulders stiff. He barely glanced in her direction. "This is absurd," her mother said, her voice sharp and cutting. "She's our daughter. She belongs with us." Melissa stepped in calmly. "Sarah is nearly an adult. She's capable of making her own decisions, and it's clear she's been deeply affected by her experiences at home. She needs space to heal, not to return to an environment that has caused her significant harm." Sarah swallowed hard, her hands trembling in her lap. She wanted to speak up, to defend herself, but the words caught in her throat. How could she explain the years of feeling like a prisoner in her own home? How could she put into words the humiliation, the shame, the suffocating control? Her mother turned to her then, her eyes narrowing. "Sarah, tell them. Tell them you want to come home." The room fell silent, everyone waiting for her response. Sarah felt the weight of their expectations pressing down on her. But then, a quiet voice inside her, one she barely recognized as her own, whispered, "You don't owe them anything." "I don't want to come home," she said, her voice trembling but firm. "I can't?" Her mother's face crumpled, her father's jaw tightened further, and Sarah felt the sting of their disappointment like a knife to her chest. But she didn't back down. The judge ruled in her favor, and as Sarah walked out of the courtroom with Melissa by her side, she felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, guilt, and something that felt a little like hope. Life in foster care wasn't perfect, but it was peaceful. Janet and Mark, her foster parents, were kind and understanding. They didn't pry into her past or try to fix her. They simply gave her the space and support she needed to start putting herself back together. Therapy became a lifeline for Sarah. At first, she had been hesitant to open up, afraid that her feelings would be dismissed or misunderstood. But her therapist, a gentle woman named Claire, had a way of making her feel safe. "Your parents' behavior wasn't your fault," Claire said during one session, her voice calm and steady. "Their need for control came from their own fears and insecurities. But that doesn't mean you deserved what they put you through." "I know that," Sarah said softly. I still feel like I failed them. Like I wasn't good enough." Claire leaned forward, her eyes kind. "Sarah, their expectations were impossible to meet. You didn't fail them. They failed you." The words hit Sarah like a punch to the gut. She had never thought of it that way before. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to find pieces of herself she had thought were lost forever. She rediscovered her love for drawing, filling sketchbooks with intricate designs and scenes from her imagination. She joined a book club at the local library, where she met people who shared her passion for stories. And slowly, she began to believe that she was more than the labels her parents had tried to place on her. One sunny afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected message from Lily, her former best friend. "Can we talk?" the message read. Sarah hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. She hadn't spoken to Lily since the night she had shown up at her house, desperate for help, only to be turned away. After a moment, she replied, "Okay." They met at a small cafe in town, the air between them thick with tension. Lily was the first to speak. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I should have been there for you. I was scared of what my parents would think, but that's no excuse. I let you down, and I hate myself for it." Sarah studied her friend's face, searching for any signs of insincerity. But all she saw was regret. "It hurt," Sarah admitted. "I felt like I had no one."
But
"I understand. It's not easy to stand up to your parents. I've been there." Lily nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I want to make it up to you. I want to be your friend again, if you'll let me." Sarah hesitated, her guard still up. But then she thought of all the times Lily had been there for her before. The laughter they had shared, the secrets they had confided in each other. "Okay," she said finally, "but it's going to take time." "I'll wait," Lily said with a small smile. As Sarah approached the 1-year anniversary of leaving her parents' home, Melissa suggested she write a letter, not to send, but as a way to release the emotions she had been holding inside. At first, Sarah resisted. She didn't want to relive the pain. But eventually, she realized that the only way to truly move forward was to confront her past. "Dear Mom and Dad, I'm not writing this to hurt you. I'm writing this because I need to let go of the pain you caused me. When you took me to that appointment, you didn't just invade my privacy, you broke my trust. You made me feel like my worth was tied to something I couldn't get back, like I was a possession instead of your daughter. And when you told everyone, you made me feel like I wasn't enough, like I was damaged. But I've learned something since then. I am enough. My worth isn't defined by you or anyone else. And I refuse to let your shame control my life anymore. I hope someday you can see me for who I really am, not who you wanted me to be. Until then, I need to focus on myself. I need to heal. Goodbye, Sarah." When she finished the letter, Sarah felt a sense of closure she hadn't expected. A few days later, she received a message from her father. "We miss you. We want to talk." Sarah stared at the message for a long time before typing a response. "I'm not ready to talk yet, but maybe someday." As she put her phone away, she felt a sense of peace. She wasn't running anymore. She was standing her ground, building a life on her own terms. And that, she realized, was the greatest victory of all. The days following Sarah's message to her father felt strange. Like she had closed one chapter of her life, but the next hadn't fully begun. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't looking over her shoulder, bracing for her parents' judgment, or waiting for the next wave of humiliation to crash over her. It was quiet, peaceful, yet a small part of her still felt lost. Sarah spent her evenings sitting on her foster family's porch, watching the world go by. She'd stare at the sunset as streaks of pink and orange painted the sky, her sketchbook balanced on her lap. Drawing had become her therapy, her outlet for emotions she couldn't quite put into words. One evening, Janet, her foster mom, joined her on the porch. Janet was a quiet woman, patient and kind. She rarely pried, but when she spoke, her words carried weight. "You've been doing a lot of thinking," Janet said, settling into the chair beside Sarah. Sarah nodded, her pencil hovering over the page. "It feels like I've been holding my breath for years, and now I don't know how to breathe." Janet smiled softly. "That's the thing about starting over. It's scary, but it's also the most freeing thing you'll ever do." Sarah looked down at her sketchbook, where she had been drawing a tree growing out of cracked earth. "I just don't know who I am without them. Without their voices in my head." "You're not who they said you were," Janet said firmly. "You're stronger than that. You've proven it every single day you've been here." The words settled deep in Sarah's chest, a warmth spreading through her. Maybe Janet was right. Maybe she was stronger than she thought. Returning to school had been one of Sarah's greatest challenges. The whispers hadn't stopped completely, though they had grown quieter with time. There were still stares, still the occasional snide comment muttered under someone's breath. But Sarah was learning to hold her head high, to let their words roll off her like water off a stone. One day, during lunch, she noticed Megan, the same girl who had humiliated her in the cafeteria months ago, sitting alone at a table. Megan's usual group of friends was nowhere to be seen, and her confident, mocking demeanor seemed to have melted away. Sarah hesitated. Every part of her wanted to walk away, to leave Megan to her solitude. But something stopped her. She knew what it felt like to be isolated, to feel like the world was against you. And as much as she wanted to hate Megan, she couldn't. Taking a deep breath, Sarah walked over and sat down across from her. Megan looked up, surprised. "What do you want?" Megan asked, her voice defensive. "To eat my lunch," Sarah said simply, unpacking her sandwich. She took a bite, pretending not to notice the tension in the air. Megan stared at her for a moment before sighing. "Why are you being nice to me?" Sarah shrugged. "Because I know what it feels like to sit alone." Megan didn't respond right away, but after a moment, her shoulders relaxed. I'm sorry," she said quietly. "For what I said, for what I did. It was cruel." Sarah looked at her, surprised by the sincerity in her voice. "Thank you," she said softly. "That means a lot." They ate in silence after that, but something had shifted. For the first time, Sarah felt like she had reclaimed a small piece of power by choosing kindness when the world had shown her cruelty. One rainy Saturday afternoon, Sarah was curled up on the couch, a book in her hands and a cup of tea on the table beside her. The sound of the rain against the windows was soothing, and for once her mind felt calm. But then the doorbell rang, shattering the peace. Janet opened the door, and Sarah's heart sank when she heard the familiar voices. Her parents had come. "Sarah," her mother called, stepping into the living room. Her father followed closely behind, his expression unreadable. Sarah stood, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "What are you doing here?" "We wanted to see you," her mother said, her voice softer than Sarah had expected. "We miss you." Sarah stared at them, her chest tightening. "You miss me? Or you miss the version of me you wanted me to be?" Her mother's face faltered, and for a moment, she looked almost vulnerable. "We were wrong," she said quietly. "We pushed you too hard. We let our fears control us. But we want to make it right." Sarah looked to her father, searching his face for any signs of remorse. He nodded, his voice low as he said, "We were just trying to protect you. But we didn't realize how much we were hurting you." A part of Sarah wanted to believe them. She wanted to throw herself into their arms and forgive them, to go back to being a family. But another part of her, the part that had fought so hard to find her own voice, knew it wasn't that simple. "I need time," she said finally. "I can't just forget everything that happened." Her parents nodded, their expressions heavy with regret. "Take all the time you need," her mother said. "We'll be here when you're ready." As they left, Sarah felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, healing wasn't as impossible as it once seemed. With her parents' visit behind her, Sarah focused on rebuilding her life. She threw herself into her passions, rediscovering the things that brought her joy. Her drawings became more vibrant, more alive, as she poured her emotions onto the page. She started volunteering at a local community center, teaching art classes to children. Seeing their faces light up as they created something from nothing filled her with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. One day, as she was packing up her supplies after a class, a little girl named Mia tugged on her sleeve. "Miss Sarah," Mia said, her big brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Why do you draw so much?" Sarah smiled, kneeling down to her level. "Because it helps me tell my story." Mia tilted her head. "What's your story?" Sarah paused, her heart swelling. "It's about a girl who learned how to be brave." Mia grinned, holding up her own drawing. "I want to be brave too." In that moment, Sarah realized how far she had come. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. And she was helping others do the same. On the 1-year anniversary of her departure from her parents' home, Sarah found herself standing at the edge of a cliff overlooking the city. The view was breathtaking, the world stretching out before her like an open canvas. Melissa stood beside her, a proud smile on her face. "You've come a long way," she said. "How do you feel?" Sarah took a deep breath, the cool breeze filling her lungs. "Like I'm finally free." She thought about everything she had been through. The pain, the heartbreak, the moments when she thought she couldn't go on. But she also thought about the strength she had found, the people who had supported her, and the life she was building for herself. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and when she checked it, she saw a message from her mother. "We're proud of you. We're sorry for everything." Sarah's chest tightened, but this time, it wasn't with anger or sadness. It was with something that felt a lot like closure. As she put her phone away, she turned to Melissa with a smile. "I think I'm ready," she said. "Ready for what?" Melissa asked. "For whatever comes next." And with that, Sarah took her first step into the future, stronger, braver, and more herself than she had ever been before.